Hi, this is Nicholas Yock, a registered education and migration agent from Pathway to Oz. Today, I'm going to discuss with you the permanent employer-sponsored visa, which is the Subclass 186, the employer-nominated scheme, or in abbreviations, the ENS visa. Most specifically, I'm going to discuss the direct entry stream of this pathway. I'll also discuss things like the eligibility, the process, the costs, and things like that. All right, so what is the ENS visa or the Subclass 186 visa? The ENS visa is a permanent employer-sponsored visa that requires a company to nominate you. It's quite similar to the TSS or the Subclass 482, which is a temporary visa, but the TSS is only temporary, okay? This 186 or the ENS visa is a permanent employer-sponsored visa. And you can apply for this visa, the permanent visa, anywhere in Australia, in Sydney, Melbourne, Brisbane, wherever you want, they're all fine. However, you can only get nominated or apply for this visa in certain occupations. And there are other requirements that you need to meet, which we'll discuss later in the video. All right, so what can you do on this visa? Well, look, as soon as you get this visa, you're a permanent resident of Australia. So it allows you to live, work, study, do whatever you want in Australia. You'll also have access to Medicare. You can include your family members on the visa. As I said before, the ENS visa is one of two streams, and we're going to talk about the direct entry stream. So to apply for the direct entry stream, there are certain requirements. Firstly, you need to be skilled and educated in an occupation which is on the medium to long term list. You need to have a skill assessment for that occupation. You need to have at least 3 years of work experience at a relevant skill level. And you need to have competent English or be a native English speaker, or from certain countries. All right, so a breakdown of the requirements. So look, you must have a full skill assessment in an occupation which is on the medium to long term list. So, the medium to long term list is very different from the short term skilled occupation list. Basically, the medium to long term list is a lot shorter. The government's identified these occupations as being specifically in demand in Australia, and there's a shortage of these occupations. Look, if you go on the government's website, basically you can see sort of which occupations are on this list. But in a nutshell, you've got things like engineering, trades, a lot of health professions, a lot of computer-based professions, and some others. Whereas the short-term skilled occupation list got a lot more, but if your occupation is on the short-term skilled occupation list, you can't apply for this visa. It needs to be on the medium to long-term list. So look, you must also pass a skill assessment, in an occupation. So the skill assessment is basically where the government gets an organisation to assess your skills, your work experience and your education to determine if you meet the Australian standards for that occupation. Now, each occupation has a different skill assessor. So if you're on the medium to long term list and you're looking through it, you can see to the right of it, it'll have the different skill assessing body, next to it. Now, each skill assessing body may have different requirements for a skill assessment, so it's important that you check it out. We've actually got another video as well, which we'll put a link to down below, just sort of, discussing the different skill assessments, the different requirements and things like that. So you also need to have worked in your occupation for at least 3 years at the relevant skill level. All right, so this doesn't mean that you've worked in your occupation for 3 years in total. It means you've worked in the occupation at the relevant skill level. So usually that means that you've graduated and you've worked for 3 years post-qualification. So generally speaking, study or work experience when you're studying may not count. You need to have the 3 full years of work experience. All right, so what is the process? Well, look, the permanent ENS visa, it's very similar to the TSS visa. However, the company is not required to become a standard business sponsor. So there's only the 2 steps. The company needs to nominate you, and you then need to apply for the visa. So you can do this, essentially at the same time. The company can nominate you, get a receipt, and then apply for your visa application. The nomination does not need to be approved before you apply for the visa application. If you're in Australia, you get granted a bridging visa, which would allow you to live and work, while the visa is being processed. The Department of Home Affairs requires a company to nominate you for the occupation you're going to work in. Immigration will then decide if you, fulfill the nomination requirements. But, basically the position must be on the medium to long term list. the employer must show there is a genuine need for you, to hire a foreign worker. You must be paid at least the Australian market salary. So that is, they don't want you paying, less than they would another Australian with similar experiences or, education. And they must give you a full-time employment contract. So look, the Australian market salary requirement, basically you need to demonstrate that if there's another Australian working in a similar role to you with similar experience, you're paid that wage. Basically, the very least it can be is $53,900, but to be honest, it's usually quite a significant amount more, depending on the occupation. Basically, immigration has this, in place to ensure that employers, aren't undercutting Australian employees by paying less to a foreign worker. All right, so labour market testing. Look, unlike the TSS visa, which is the temporary employer-sponsored visa, labour market testing is not needed for the ENS direct entry stream. So you don't need to advertise the position and demonstrate that you couldn't find another Australian to fill the role, which is great. It's not 100% necessary. It could be a good idea to demonstrate the genuine need, but in a climate like today where there's a lot of unemployment in certain occupations, it's not necessarily 100% required. And the reason for that is because if you're applying for the ENS visa, your occupation is already on the medium to long-term list, which basically means that the government's already identified that it's in short supply in Australia. So look, the next step, once you've done the nomination, is the visa application. And the visa application is, generally speaking, a lot easier than the nomination. Basically, in the visa application, you just need to show that you've got the experience, to apply for the visa. So basically, you've got to show that you've got the skill assessment, the 3 years post-qualification work experience, have competent English, good health, character, that sort of thing. So, what are the charges for the ENS visa? Well, it's a permanent visa, so it's not cheap. The visa application charge is $4,045. There's another fee called a training levy, which is usually around $3,000 for most companies. It can be a little more in a larger company. And the nomination fee is $540. The visa processing times can vary greatly for this visa. Look, it could be anywhere from as low as 3 months up to, over a year. Please note, if you do apply within Australia, you're granted a bridging visa. So as long as you apply before your visa expires, you're granted a bridging visa, which will allow you to live, work, and remain in Australia while it's processing. I hope this information provided today gives you sort of a better overview of the employer-nominated scheme visa. It is a permanent visa to Australia, which could, be a great pathway for a lot of applicants. If you do have any questions about this visa, feel free to contact Pathway to Oz. Thank you.